Welcome back, and if you've been sleeping on Jefferson Nickels, today might be the day that changes how you look at your loose change forever. Most people walk right past these coins without a second thought, but tucked inside certain Jefferson Nickels is a production story so unusual, so tangled up in national crisis and institutional pressure, that even seasoned collectors stop and take a second look. Before you dismiss the next one you find, you might want to hear what the right example in the right condition with the right details has occasionally done at serious collector auctions. This is the Jefferson Nickel story that most people never get told. First coin. 1943 United States Jefferson Nickel bearing the Philadelphia mint mark. And before you set that coin aside as just another wartime relic, understand that what you're holding in your hand is one of the most historically loaded 5-cent pieces ever struck in American history. A coin that was born out of desperation, redesigned by necessity, and quietly became one of the most fascinating chapters in the entire Jefferson Nickel series. By 1943, the United States was fully consumed by the Second World War, and the machinery of American industry had been retooled so completely for military production that even the composition of pocket change became a matter of national strategy. Nickel, the metal that had given the 5-cent piece its nickname for generations, was suddenly classified as a critical war material. It was needed for armor plating, for shell casings, for the mechanical guts of military equipment being shipped to battlefields on multiple continents. And so the United States Mint did something it had never done before and hasn't done since in quite the same way. It pulled nickel out of the alloy entirely and replaced it with a composition of 56% copper, 35% silver, and 9% manganese. That change alone makes every single 1943 Jefferson Nickel chemically and visually distinct from every nickel struck before the war and every nickel struck after it. And if you've never stopped to think about the fact that your 1943 nickel contains real silver, now is the moment to let that land. The Philadelphia Mint was the workhorse of American coin production throughout the war years, and in 1943 it struck an enormous quantity of these silver composition Jefferson Nickels, operating its presses in long industrial shifts to keep coinage flowing through an economy stretched thin by rationing and uncertainty. What makes the Philadelphia issue specifically interesting among the three 1943 mint marks is a detail that trips up newer collectors every single time: the large P mint mark that appears on the reverse of the coin, positioned above the dome of Monticello. Before 1942, Philadelphia coins carried no mint mark at all, operating under a long-standing tradition that the home mint required no identifier because it was the default. But when the wartime silver composition was introduced, the mint made the deliberate decision to mark all silver alloy nickels with their mint of origin, and Philadelphia received a large, prominent P that appeared on American coinage for the very first time in the mint's history. This wasn't a small technical footnote, it was a landmark moment in American numismatic tradition, and it means that a 1943 P Jefferson nickel carries on its reverse a detail that had literally never existed on any United States coin before that year. When you look at that P above Monticello's roofline, you're not just reading a mint mark, you're looking at a first. Hold a 1943 P Jefferson nickel at an angle under natural light, and the first thing that separates it visually from a standard pre-war or post-war nickel is its color. The silver content gives these coins a warmer, slightly different reflective quality compared to the cooler blue-gray of a standard copper-nickel composition. Not dramatically different to an untrained eye, but unmistakable once you've handled enough of both types side by side. The surfaces tend to show a particular kind of luster when uncirculated, a smooth rolling brightness that behaves differently from the harder, flatter shine of a standard nickel alloy, and collectors who specialize in this series learn to recognize that tonal quality almost instinctively. On the obverse, Felix Schlag's portrait of Thomas Jefferson remains the design anchor. The third president faces left in a style that was considered modern and dignified at the time of the series' 1938 debut. And on high-grade examples, the fine detail work in Jefferson's hair, his collar, and the lettering of "In God We Trust" and "Liberty" can be remarkably crisp, even on coins that are now more than 80 years old. The reverse carries Monticello rendered in careful architectural detail, and on the finest surviving 1943 P examples, that portico staircase, those famous full steps that define premium grades in the Jefferson Nickel series, can be absolutely stunning, each horizontal line clean and separated, a testament to the die quality and striking pressure used on coins that came off the press at their best. The story of how these coins actually entered circulation is worth sitting with, because it adds a dimension of human experience that no price guide can capture. In 1943, a nickel bought real things: a candy bar, a phone call from a payphone, a newspaper with a front page that might carry the name of a battle your brother or husband was fighting in. These coins passed through the hands of factory workers and soldiers' wives and grocery clerks and children, saving up for something that felt impossibly far away. And the wear patterns on circulated survivors tell that story in the gradual softening of Jefferson's cheekbone and the slow erosion of Monticello's fine lines. Most 1943p nickels you'll encounter in the wild today are well-worn, circulated thoroughly through a decade or more of active use before the coin gradually retired from commerce. And those heavily worn examples, while historically meaningful, occupy the lower end of collector interest in purely market terms. But the coins that somehow avoided that fate, the ones that slipped into collections or rolled paper tubes or forgotten mint sets in the 1940s and emerged decades later with their original surfaces intact, those coins represent a completely different conversation, one where preservation becomes the defining variable in a way that transforms an 80-cent coin into something that serious collectors track with genuine intensity. Minting variations on the 1943p Jefferson nickel are a thread that rewards patient investigation and careful magnification, and the collector community has documented several die-related anomalies across the series that can meaningfully affect how a coin is evaluated. Double die varieties, where a misalignment during the process of transferring the design from hub to working die caused elements of the portrait or lettering to appear faintly echoed or offset, have been identified on 1943 Philadelphia examples, and while not all doubled dies are dramatic enough to be immediately visible to the naked eye, the more pronounced varieties attract sustained collector attention. Die clash impressions, where the obverse and reverse dies made contact without a planchet between them and transferred ghost images of their designs onto each other's faces, appear occasionally on wartime Jefferson nickels and can produce eerie, subtle visual effects on struck coins, a faint outline of Monticello appearing where it shouldn't, or the ghost of Jefferson's profile visible in the reverse field. Strike quality varies coin to coin even within the same production run, and coins struck from fresh, well-maintained dies in optimal conditions show a sharpness and completeness that coins struck later in a die's working life simply cannot match. Examining the strike alignment on your coin, whether the design sits centered and square within the rim or shows a slight shift suggesting the planchet wasn't perfectly positioned in the collar, is one of the basic but genuinely revealing checks that separates a careful collector from someone who just glances and guesses. Practical examination of a 1943p Jefferson nickel starts with weight, and this is non-negotiable as a first step. The wartime silver alloy composition produces a coin that should weigh 5 grams on a precise digital scale, identical in weight to the standard cupronickel composition. So weight alone won't confirm the silver content, but a coin that deviates significantly from 5 grams is immediately suspect and warrants closer investigation before any other conclusions are drawn. The real compositional check comes from a magnet. A 1943p Jefferson nickel should show absolutely no magnetic attraction whatsoever, since neither silver, copper, nor manganese are magnetic metals, and any 1943 nickel that sticks to a magnet is either a counterfeit or a coin that has been altered in some way that removes it from legitimate collector consideration entirely. Beyond the magnet test, examine the rim under magnification for sharpness and completeness. A well-struck coin from a good die will show a rim that is even, crisp, and fully formed around the entire circumference, while a weakly struck or damaged example will show areas where the rim flattens, merges with the field, or shows contact marks from years of handling. Look at the lettering on both sides under a loupe and check for any signs of doubling, repunching, or die damage that might indicate a variety worth documenting. And if you find something that doesn't match what standard references show for a typical 1943p, resist the temptation to declare it a discovery, and instead bring it to a professional authentication service where it can be properly evaluated. The value landscape for 1943p Jefferson Nickels spans a range that reflects the enormous spread between common circulated examples and exceptional preserved survivors, and understanding where your coin sits within that range requires honest assessment rather than wishful thinking. Heavily circulated examples with smooth high points and reduced detail in the steps and portrait are worth very little in purely market terms, perhaps $1 or $2 from a dealer buying in bulk, or modest amounts in general collector lots, because supply is plentiful and demand at the low grades is limited. Moving into the middle grades, coins that show light to moderate wear but retain reasonable detail can trade in the range of a few dollars to perhaps $15 or $20 depending on eye appeal, the sharpness of remaining detail, and whether the coin presents attractively despite its circulation history. Uncirculated examples graded by professional services like PCGS or NGC in the MS63, to MS65 range begin to attract meaningfully stronger interest, with certified coins in those grades having appeared at auction with realized prices in the range of $50 to several $100s depending on the specific grade and strike quality. And these are estimates drawn from historical auction records, never guarantees of what any future transaction will produce. At the very top of the condition scale, exceptionally preserved 1943p nickels with full steps designations in grades of MS66 or MS67 represent genuinely rare survivors, and certified coins at those levels with strong eye appeal have occasionally attracted prices that reach into the low thousands of dollars at major numismatic auctions. Though examples at that level are uncommon enough that encountering one should be treated as a significant discovery requiring immediate professional evaluation rather than casual assumption. What the 1943p Jefferson Nickel ultimately represents, beyond the silver content, beyond the historic first appearance of the Philadelphia mint mark, beyond whatever value a grading service might one day assign to a particular example, is a tangible thread connecting the present moment to one of the most consequential years in modern human history. The people who spent these coins in 1943 were living through events so enormous that history books still struggle to contain them, and yet the coins themselves are humble, functional, intentionally ordinary. 5 cents was 5 cents even when the world was on fire. That tension between the mundane and the monumental is exactly what makes old coins worth examining carefully rather than dismissing casually, because the ordinary object and the extraordinary moment are sometimes the same thing wearing different faces. If you have a 1943p nickel, give it the attention it's earned, check the weight, test it with a magnet, study the surfaces under good light and magnification, compare what you see against published variety references, and if anything about your coin strikes you as unusual or potentially significant, take it to a professional authenticator before drawing conclusions in either direction. The hobby rewards patience and precision over excitement and assumption, and the collector who looks hardest and verifies most carefully is the one who occasionally finds something the rest of the world walked past without noticing, and somewhere out there, in a drawer or a jar or a coat pocket from 1943 that nobody has opened in decades, there may be a coin waiting that changes someone's understanding of what they've been carrying all along. Next coin, 1939 United States Jefferson Nickel, and if you've got one sitting in an old drawer, a dusty coin jar, or tucked inside a forgotten wallet that hasn't been opened since before you were born, you might want to set everything else aside for the next few minutes, because this particular coin carries a story that goes far deeper than 5 cents. The year 1939 sits at one of the most charged moments in American history. The country had spent the better part of a decade clawing its way out of the Great Depression. Factories were slowly humming back to life, and across the Atlantic, the world was tilting toward a war that would reshape every nation on Earth. It was against that backdrop of uncertainty and quiet resilience that the United States Mint introduced a brand new nickel design, one that replaced the long-running Buffalo nickel and brought a founding father's face to the 5-cent piece for the first time. Felix Schlag, a German-born sculptor who had emigrated to America and entered an open competition among nearly 400 artists, won the right to immortalize Thomas Jefferson on the obverse and his beloved Monticello estate on the reverse, a design so enduring that variations of it still appear in your pocket change today. What makes the 1939 edition particularly compelling isn't just its age. It's the fact that it arrived at the very beginning of a new design era, pressed during a period when American craftsmanship was being pushed to prove something to a nation that desperately needed confidence. These coins weren't minted with collectors in mind. They were minted for a country trying to survive, and that tension between utility and artistry is baked into every single one. The 1939 Jefferson Nickel was produced at 3 different facilities, and understanding where your coin was struck is the very first clench of excitement that collectors feel when they flip one over. Philadelphia produced the largest share without a mint mark, while Denver struck its examples with a small D and San Francisco added an S, both mint marks appearing on the reverse, just to the right of Monticello's base. Philadelphia's output was enormous, running well into the tens of millions, which means a plain 1939 nickel without a mint mark is genuinely common in lower grades, and in well-worn circulated condition, might realistically only fetch somewhere between 25 cents and a couple of dollars at best, and that's worth saying plainly so nobody walks away with inflated expectations. But here is where the story splits into something far more interesting, because not all 1939 nickels are equal, and the differences between a forgettable filler coin and a heart-racing rarity can sometimes be measured in details so small you'd need a loupe to find them. The Denver issue carries a stronger collector premium simply because fewer were made, and the San Francisco example is rarer still, with mintage numbers that collectors have spent decades chasing. Even among Philadelphia coins, there are documented doubled die varieties, coins where a misalignment during the hubbing process caused design elements like the lettering or Jefferson's portrait to appear faintly echoed, doubled, ghosted. And those varieties, when confirmed by professional authenticators, have sold at auction for prices that would make your jaw drop compared to face value. Run your thumb across the surface of a 1939 Jefferson nickel, and you're feeling something that's composed of 75% copper and 25% nickel, a composition that gives the coin a silvery gray tone distinctly different from the wartime nickels that would follow just a few years later, when nickel was pulled from the alloy entirely to serve the military effort. This matters more than it might seem, because one of the most common questions collectors ask when sorting through old coins is whether they're holding a standard issue or something compositionally different. And with Jefferson Nickels, the wartime silver alloy coins of 1942 through 1945 are sometimes confused with pre-war examples by newer collectors. A 1939 nickel should weigh exactly 5 grams on a precise digital scale. If yours comes in noticeably lighter or heavier, that's a flag worth investigating further, though weight alone never confirms or denies authenticity without additional examination. The strike quality on well-made 1939 examples is something that genuinely separates the ordinary from the exceptional, and on a high-grade coin you should expect to see crisp, sharp steps on Monticello's portico, the so-called full steps designation that the numismatic community uses to describe coins where all 6 steps at the base of the building are cleanly defined and unmerged. Full steps 1939 Jefferson Nickels are not easily found, and when they surface in grades like MS65 or higher with that designation attached, verified and certified by services like PCGS or NGC, the conversation shifts from pocket change to serious collector territory, with values that can realistically climb into the hundreds or in exceptional cases beyond $1,000. Though these are estimates, never guarantees. And the market is always subject to change. There's an emotional weight to holding a coin from 1939 that goes beyond the numismatic checklist, and the most passionate collectors will tell you that this weight is precisely what drives the hobby. Think about what a nickel meant in 1939. It could buy a loaf of bread, a cup of coffee, a newspaper carrying headlines about Hitler's march into Poland. Ordinary Americans handled these coins with calloused hands, stuffed them into apron pockets, dropped them into vending machines and parking meters and church collection plates. The vast majority of surviving 1939 nickels are worn smooth in the high points, Jefferson's cheekbones, the lettering on the rim, the fine architectural details of Monticello, because they did exactly what they were designed to do, and they did it for years. But every now and then, a coin slips through the decades untouched, sealed in a paper roll, tucked in a mint set, forgotten in a safe, and when it emerges it carries the full force of its original strike, every detail preserved as though time simply stepped around it. Those are the coins that make collectors stop breathing for a moment. Those are the coins that get pulled from estate sales and garage box lots and old coffee cans and end up on auction podiums. And the stories surrounding them, a grandmother's collection, a barn find, a boy's allowance never spent, give them a human dimension that no price guide can fully quantify. Possible minting variations on the 1939 Jefferson nickel deserve serious attention from anyone willing to do the careful work of examination, because the mint in that era was operating under volume pressure that sometimes introduced fascinating anomalies into production. Beyond the double die obverse varieties already mentioned, collectors have documented repunched mint marks on the Denver and San Francisco issues. Cases where the mint mark was physically punched into the working die more than once, leaving a shadow or shift visible under magnification. There are also known cases of die clashes, where the obverse and reverse dies struck each other without a planchet between them, leaving ghost impressions of each side's design faintly visible on the opposite face of subsequently struck coins. Off-center strikes, though rare on nickels, do appear occasionally, coins where the design is shifted noticeably from center, leaving a crescent of blank planchet visible, and these command strong premiums proportional to how dramatically off-center the shift is, provided the date and mint mark remain fully visible. None of these varieties are guaranteed to make you rich, and that point cannot be stressed enough. The vast majority of error coins and varieties are worth modest amounts even in the collector market, and only the most dramatic, well-documented, and professionally authenticated examples reach prices that collectors talk about for years. But the possibility is real, and it's that possibility, quiet, stubborn, unconfirmed until the moment it isn't, that keeps people searching. If you're sitting with a 1939 Jefferson nickel right now and wondering what you actually have, here's the practical framework that experienced collectors apply before they let excitement outrun reason. Start with the mint mark. No mint mark means Philadelphia, D means Denver, S means San Francisco, and the San Francisco issue in uncirculated condition is meaningfully scarcer than its Philadelphia counterpart. Look at the rim under good lighting. A coin with sharp, unbroken rims that show no wear or dings suggests it spent very little time in circulation, and that's your first encouraging signal. Examine the high points of the portrait, particularly Jefferson's cheekbone and the hair above his ear, because wear shows up earliest in these areas, and a coin without any visible wear there is significantly more interesting than one that's been rubbed smooth. Flip to the reverse and look at those Monticello steps. Get out a magnifying glass, angle the coin under a strong light, and count whether you can distinguish individual separated steps or whether they've merged into a featureless plateau. Then look carefully at the lettering Monticello, 5 cents, EPLURIBUSUNUM, and see if any letters show signs of doubling, a slight secondary shadow of the letter offset in any direction. If any of these examinations produce something that feels unusual or remarkable, the responsible next step is always professional authentication through a reputable third-party grading service, because an opinion from a coin dealer at a local shop, while useful, carries nowhere near the weight of a certified slab from a recognized grading authority when it comes to establishing value and marketability. The realistic market value conversation around the 1939 Jefferson nickel requires honesty, and the most useful thing anyone can tell you is that the range is genuinely enormous depending on factors entirely specific to your individual coin. A heavily worn example with no mint mark, the kind that spent 30 years in circulation before retiring to a jar, is worth face value or a marginal premium to a dealer who will likely just add it to a bulk lot. A lightly circulated Philadelphia issue in fine to very fine condition might realistically bring $1 to $3 in today's market, which is still more than face value but hardly the stuff of treasure hunting legends. The calculus starts shifting when you move into about uncirculated territory, where original luster is just beginning to fade from the high points, and here you might see values of $10 to $30 depending on eye appeal. True uncirculated examples graded by a professional service in the MS63 to MS65 range begin attracting serious attention, particularly the San Francisco issue, and certified coins at that level have sold at auction for anywhere from $50 to several $100s, depending on the specific grade, the strength of the strike, and the particular appetite of the bidders in the room on that given day. High-grade examples with full steps designations are a different conversation entirely, with MS66 full steps examples from San Francisco having appeared at major auctions with realized prices ranging into the low thousands. Though these are rare appearances, these are exceptional coins, and prices like that should be understood as the ceiling, not the expectation. All values discussed here are estimates only, drawn from historical auction records and price guide references, and they represent what the market has done, not what it will do tomorrow. What keeps people coming back to coins like the 1939 Jefferson nickel, decade after decade, generation after generation, isn't really the money, though the money is a genuine and legitimate part of the hobby. It's the feeling that ordinary objects can carry extraordinary secrets, that the coin you found in your grandfather's desk drawer might be the one that everyone else overlooked, that the world is still full of discoveries waiting for someone patient and curious enough to look. And here's what you need to hold on to as you go back to whatever jar or envelope or old collection you pulled this coin from. The most significant finds in numismatic history didn't happen in bank vaults or at major auction houses. They happened in attics. They happened in shoeboxes. They happened when someone decided that an old nickel was worth a second look instead of a quick dismissal. Your 1939 Jefferson nickel might be common. It probably is. But it also might not be, and the only way to know is to look harder, measure more carefully, compare more honestly, and if something doesn't add up the way you expect, trust that feeling enough to have it professionally examined. The next coin we're going to examine together has a story even stranger than this one, with a production mystery so bizarre that experts are still arguing about it today. And if you thought a nickel could carry this much history, wait until you see what's coming next. Next coin, United States 5-cent coin, also known as a Jefferson nickel from 1965. And if that date makes you pause even slightly, you're already ahead of most people who handle these coins without a second thought. Because 1965 is one of those years in American coinage history, where the ground shifted beneath the entire monetary system in ways that still echo through collector communities more than half a century later. To understand why a 1965 Jefferson nickel deserves serious attention, you have to understand the crisis that surrounded it, a crisis so significant that it fundamentally altered the composition of American silver coinage, and sent the United States Mint into a period of frantic, pressure-filled production that created some of the most fascinating and debated anomalies in modern numismatic history. By the mid-1960s, The price of silver on the open market had climbed to the point where the metal content of dimes, quarters, and half dollars was approaching, and then threatening to exceed the face value of the coins themselves, which created an economic feedback loop that the government could not ignore. People were hoarding silver coins, melting them, pulling them out of circulation faster than the mint could replace them. And the entire system of everyday American commerce was feeling the strain. Congress responded in 1965 by passing the Coinage Act, which eliminated silver from dimes and quarters entirely and dramatically reduced it in the half dollar, replacing precious metal with the copper-nickel clad composition that defines most American coinage today. The Jefferson nickel had never contained silver in its standard composition, except during the wartime years of 1942 through 1945, so its alloy of 75% copper and 25% nickel remained unchanged in 1965. But the chaos of that transition year wrapped around these coins like weather, and the production decisions made under that pressure created a numismatic landscape that collectors are still carefully navigating. What makes the 1965 Jefferson nickel immediately unusual before you even get to error coins or varieties is the complete absence of a mint mark, and understanding why that absence exists requires a brief step into the deliberate policy decisions of the era. When the Coinage Act of 1965 took effect, the United States Mint suspended the use of mint marks on all coins, a suspension that lasted through 1967, meaning that Jefferson Nickels from 1965, 1966, and 1967 carry no mint mark regardless of where they were actually struck. The official reasoning was partly practical. By removing mint marks, the mint could shift production between facilities without collectors being able to distinguish one facility's output from another, theoretically discouraging the hoarding and speculation that had contributed to the coin shortage in the first place. Philadelphia, Denver, and potentially other facilities were all operating under enormous production pressure during this period, running presses at maximum capacity to flood commerce with new coinage, and the quality control standards that might normally govern a more measured production environment were sometimes stretched thin by sheer volume demands. This means that 1965 Jefferson Nickels exist across a remarkably wide spectrum of strike quality, from beautifully rendered examples with crisp architectural detail on Monticello's facade to weakly struck coins, where the famous portico steps are barely suggested rather than clearly defined. And that variation in strike quality is one of the first things a collector examines when evaluating a 1965 nickel that has survived with its original surfaces intact. Felix Schlag's design, which had anchored the Jefferson nickel since 1938, appears on the 1965 issue with all the quiet dignity that made it endure for decades, and taking a moment to truly study what that design contains reveals a level of craftsmanship that mass production sometimes obscures but never fully erases. On the obverse, Jefferson face is left in a three-quarter perspective that Schlag developed through careful study of historical portraits and sculptural references, the third president rendered with a gravitas appropriate to his place in American history, the author of the Declaration of Independence, the architect of Monticello itself, a man whose intellectual restlessness shaped a nation. The lettering on the obverse, "In God We Trust" to the left of the portrait, "Liberty" to the right, and the date below should on a well-preserved 1965 example appear sharp and fully formed, each letter cleanly separated from its neighbors with no merging at the bases where weak strikes or worn dies tend to show their first signs of fatigue. Flip the coin and Monticello dominates the reverse in a composition that Schlag eventually revised in 1966 after criticism that his original rendering was architecturally imprecise, which makes the 1965 reverse one of the last years to display the original Schlag reverse design before that modification, a detail that adds a quiet layer of historical significance for collectors who track design evolution through the series. The dome, the columns, the wings extending to either side of the main structure, on coins struck from fresh dies in optimal conditions, the level of architectural detail captured in a coin roughly the size of a shirt button is genuinely remarkable, and finding a 1965 nickel where that detail survives fully intact is a more uncommon experience than the coin's high mintage numbers might suggest. The production environment of 1965 was unlike anything the United States Mint had experienced in the modern era, and the pressure applied to every stage of the coining process during that period created conditions where minting anomalies were not just possible but statistically inevitable across millions of coins, moving through machinery operating at extraordinary throughput. Among the variations that collectors and researchers have documented or discussed in connection with 1965 Jefferson Nickels, die-related issues occupy a prominent place. Coins struck from dies that had been used past their optimal working life show a characteristic mushiness in the fine detail, A softening of edges and a filling in of the spaces between design elements that experienced collectors can identify almost immediately under magnification. More intriguing are the coins where mechanical conditions during striking produced alignment issues, rotated die errors, where the relationship between the obverse and reverse designs deviates significantly from the standard 12 o'clock orientation, represent the kind of dramatic minting anomaly that requires no special expertise to recognize once you know to check for it. And a 1965 Jefferson nickel with a confirmed significant die rotation is the kind of coin that gets documented, talked about, and sought after by specialists in error coinage. Off-center strikes, where the planchet was not perfectly centered within the collar when the dies came together, appear occasionally across the entire coinage of this era, and the dramatic examples where the design is visibly shifted with a crescent of blank planchet clearly visible, while the date remains readable are the specimens that command the most sustained collector attention. None of these anomalies are guaranteed to be present on any given 1965 nickel, and the overwhelming majority of survivors are standard coins without dramatic varieties, but the documentation of such possibilities is precisely what motivates careful examination rather than casual dismissal. Approaching a 1965 Jefferson nickel, with the methodology of a thoughtful collector rather than a casual observer, begins with the most fundamental physical checks, and the first of those is weight. A standard 1965 Jefferson nickel should register 5 grams on a precise digital scale, and while slight variations can occur from normal production tolerances, a coin that deviates meaningfully from that figure warrants investigation before any other conclusions are drawn. The metal color under good lighting should present as the characteristic silver gray of cupronickel, a tone that is distinctly cooler and more neutral than the warmer golden brown of copper or the brighter flash of silver, and because 1965 exists at a moment of compositional transition in American coinage broadly. Collectors who handle mixed groups of coins from this era occasionally encounter planchet anomalies where a nickel composition planchet found its way into a press calibrated for a different denomination, producing a coin that looks profoundly wrong in ways that are immediately visible to anyone paying attention. Examine the rim carefully under magnification, running your attention around the full circumference of the coin to check for evenness, sharpness, and completeness. A coin struck properly from a fresh die in a well-maintained collar will show a rim that is consistent and fully raised all the way around, while coins with collar issues or die problems often betray those problems first at the rim, where the metal flow is most sensitive to mechanical inconsistency. Check the strike alignment by holding the coin vertically by the edge and observing whether Jefferson's portrait on the obverse and Monticello on the reverse orient as expected when the coin is flipped on its vertical axis. And if the reverse design appears rotated to any significant degree, that observation deserves documentation and professional follow-up rather than a quick dismissal. The lettering across both faces of the 1965 Jefferson nickel rewards close examination under magnification for any signs of doubling or other die-related anomalies that might indicate a variety with collector significance beyond the standard issue. Double die varieties occur when the process of creating a working die from a hub introduces a misalignment between two successive impressions, leaving design elements, letters, numerals, portrait features, or architectural details, with a visible secondary echo offset in a specific direction, and on a coin produced during the high-pressure manufacturing environment of 1965. The conditions that produce such varieties were present in ways that make their existence plausible even if confirmed dramatic examples are not commonly encountered. Examine Monticello on the reverse with patience and a quality loupe, looking for any letters that appear slightly thickened, shadowed, or split in ways that differentiate them from the clean single impression lettering of a standard coin, and do the same with 5 cents, EPLURBUSUNUM, and the obverse inscriptions. The date itself, positioned at the base of Jefferson's portrait on the obverse, is another area where repunching or doubling can sometimes be identified. And while the 1965 date is not among the most famous double-date Jefferson nickel varieties documented by researchers, the year's production conditions mean that anything found and professionally confirmed would enter collector documentation as a genuine discovery. The important discipline throughout this examination process is separating observation from conclusion. Noting that something appears unusual is the appropriate response, while declaring a variety discovery without professional authentication is the mistake that costs collectors credibility and sometimes money. Discussing market values for 1965 Jefferson Nickels requires the same kind of careful calibration that honest collectors apply to any evaluation conversation, because the spread between the most common examples and the rarest survivors is genuinely substantial, and the factors determining where any individual coin falls within that range are specific, technical, and not reducible to simple rules. Standard circulated examples of the 1965 Jefferson nickel, the kind worn smooth through years of commerce, with Jefferson's cheekbones softened and Monticello's steps merged into a gentle plateau, are worth face value or the most modest premium in dealer transactions, and anyone expecting meaningful money from a heavily worn 1965 nickel should adjust those expectations toward realism before engaging with the market. Moving into higher circulated grades where some original detail remains visible, values begin to separate from face value in more meaningful ways, though still modestly. A coin in extremely fine condition with crisp remaining detail but clear evidence of circulation might attract a few dollars from a collector building a complete Jefferson nickel date set, which is itself a legitimate and common collecting goal that creates steady demand for clean examples across all dates including transitional years like 1965. Uncirculated examples certified by professional grading services in grades of MS63 through MS65 represent a meaningfully different market conversation, with authenticated coins in those ranges having appeared at auction for amounts ranging from modest to several dozen dollars depending on strike quality and eye appeal, and the full steps designation, when the portico staircase is cleanly rendered and professionally confirmed, adds a premium that reflects genuine scarcity among survivors from this production-pressured year. Exceptional coins, verified mint errors with dramatic and confirmed anomalies, or extraordinarily high-grade examples in MS66 or above with full steps, have in specific documented auction circumstances attracted values reaching into the hundreds of dollars, and in the rarest and most exceptional cases involving major confirmed errors, collector interest can extend further. Though these outcomes represent the extreme end of a wide distribution and should never be treated as typical or guaranteed results. The 1965 Jefferson nickel sits at a crossroads of American history that gives it a resonance beyond its modest denomination and high surviving population, because it was minted at a moment when the country was renegotiating its relationship with money itself, stripping precious metal from coins that had contained it for generations, industrializing production to a degree that prioritized quantity over the careful craftsmanship of earlier eras. Doing all of it under the economic and political pressures of a decade that was remaking American society from the ground up. That context doesn't transform every surviving 1965 nickel into a treasure, but it does give each one a historical anchor that makes thoughtful examination worthwhile rather than futile, and the collector who approaches these coins with curiosity rather than expectation is the one most likely to find something genuinely interesting. Before making any decision to buy, sell, or formally attribute a 1965 Jefferson nickel based on what you observe during personal examination, the consistent and sincere recommendation of experienced collectors and professional numismatists is to seek authentication and grading from a recognized third-party service. Because the difference between a coin that appears significant and a coin that is professionally confirmed as significant is the difference between a story and a documented discovery. And in the collector market, that difference translates directly into credibility, proper valuation, and protection against the misidentifications that even experienced eyes sometimes make when enthusiasm outpaces evidence. Somewhere in circulation right now, in the coin rolls and old collections and forgotten containers where numismatic history quietly waits, there are 1965 Jefferson nickels that have never been seriously examined, and the next extraordinary find in this series could come from exactly the kind of patient, methodical, eyes-open searching that begins with picking up a coin most people would never look at twice. Last coin, United States 5-cent coin, also known as a Jefferson nickel from 1966, and if you've ever sorted through a jar of old change and tossed this one aside without a second glance, you wouldn't be alone, because the 1966 Jefferson nickel is one of those coins that wears its significance quietly, demanding a certain kind of patience and historical awareness, before it reveals exactly how unusual its circumstances of production actually were. The year 1966 sits inside one of the most turbulent stretches in the entire history of American coinage, a period so operationally extreme that the United States Mint was functioning under conditions that had no real precedent in the modern era, and the decisions made during that window, about mint marks, about production targets, about quality control, created a coin that is far more layered and collectible than its common appearance suggests to the untrained eye. The backdrop to all of this was the great American coin shortage of the mid-1960s, a crisis that had been building for years as rising silver prices and widespread hoarding drained circulating coinage from the economy faster than normal mint production could replace it, and the government's legislative response, the Coinage Act of 1965, had set off a chain of institutional changes that were still reshaping mint operations well into 1966 and beyond. Production quotas were set at historically unprecedented levels, Presses ran in extended shifts, and the organizational culture inside the mint temporarily subordinated the careful, measured craftsmanship of peacetime coinage to the raw necessity of volume. Get coins into circulation, fill the registers and the cash drawers and the parking meters, keep commerce moving in a country that was simultaneously navigating the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, and an economy being stretched in every direction at once. It is against that backdrop, urgent, pressured, historically electric, that the 1966 Jefferson Nickel was born. One of the most immediately distinctive facts about the 1966 Jefferson Nickel, and one that collectors encounter as soon as they begin researching the series, is the continued absence of a mint mark, a policy that had been introduced in 1965 and remained in effect through 1967, as part of the government's deliberate strategy to discourage the speculative hoarding that had contributed to the coin shortage in the first place. By removing mint marks, the mint eliminated the ability of collectors and speculators to distinguish Philadelphia coins from Denver coins or any other facility's output, theoretically flattening the market for Dayton mint mark combinations and encouraging coins to stay in circulation rather than being pulled out and sorted by origin. What this means for the 1966 Jefferson Nickel specifically is that every example you encounter, regardless of where it was actually struck, presence as an anonymous product of the American coining system, its facility of origin as unknowable from the coin itself, as the identity of the individual press operator who fed the planchet into the collar. This anonymity has an odd effect on collectors. It removes one of the primary variables that drives collecting interest in most other years of the Jefferson Nickel series, but it simultaneously gives the 1966 issue a kind of unified identity, a year coin rather than a mint coin, studied and appreciated as a singular product of a singular moment rather than as one branch of a three-part mint mark family. And within that unified identity, the differences that do exist, strike quality, die state, surface preservation, and the possibility of production anomalies, become the primary axes along which collector interest organizes itself. The design that Felix Schlag had introduced to the Jefferson Nickel in 1938 underwent a quiet but meaningful revision that directly affects how 1966 coins are understood within the full sweep of the series. Because beginning in 1966, the reverse design of Monticello was updated to address long-standing criticisms that Schlag's original rendering of Jefferson's beloved Virginia estate was architecturally imprecise and insufficiently faithful to the actual building. The revised reverse, which debuted on 1966 production, brought sharper and more accurate proportions to Monticello's facade, refining the relationship between the dome, the columns, the pediment, and the flanking wings in ways that architectural purists and serious collectors have noted as a genuine improvement in historical fidelity. This means that the 1966 Jefferson Nickel is among the first coins to carry the updated Monticello reverse, a detail that gives it a quiet significance in design history terms that tends to be overlooked in general discussions of the series, but matters considerably to collectors who study the Jefferson Nickel with the kind of attention that distinguishes specialists from generalists. On the obverse, Jefferson's portrait remains the Schlag rendering that had anchored the series since its debut, the statesman facing left, rendered with the gravity and restraint of a man who understood that posterity was watching. And on high-quality 1966 examples, the interplay between the portrait and the revised reverse creates a coin that, when examined carefully under good lighting, presents as a more cohesive and architecturally credible design than many collectors realize they've been walking past for decades. Holding a 1966 Jefferson Nickel, and examining it with the deliberate attention it deserves begins with understanding what you're looking at compositionally, because the alloy of 75% copper and 25% nickel that defines the standard Jefferson Nickel gives this coin specific visual and physical properties that serve as baseline references for identifying anything anomalous. The color under natural light should be a consistent, cool silver gray, not the warmer tone of the wartime Silver Alley nickels from 1942 through 1945, and not the distinctly reddish cast of copper, and any 1966 nickel that presents with an unusual color, whether warmer or more yellowish or noticeably different from what standard examples show, is a coin that warrants closer investigation rather than casual dismissal. The weight of a properly produced 1966 Jefferson Nickel is 5 grams, and while a small kitchen scale won't give you the precision of a professional numismatic balance, a coin that registers meaningfully above or below that figure on any reasonably accurate scale is a coin that has raised a question requiring a better answer than personal examination alone can provide. The strike quality on 1966 examples varies considerably across the production run, a direct consequence of the volume-first manufacturing environment of the era. And the difference between a coin struck from a fresh die at the beginning of its working life and one struck from a fatigued die near the end of it can be dramatic when examined side by side, with fresh die coins showing crisp, fully realized detail in the architectural elements of Monticello and the fine portrait work of the obverse, while late die examples show a characteristic softness and filling that experienced collectors identify almost reflexively. The range of minting variations and production anomalies that collectors have documented or theorized in connection with the 1966 Jefferson Nickel reflects both the unusual pressures of the production environment and the inherent variability of a high-volume industrial coining operation running at the edge of its operational capacity. Die-related doubling, where successive hub impressions during die manufacture introduced a misalignment that left design elements appearing echoed or split, is a category of variety that researchers have examined across the full range of mid-1960s Jefferson Nickels, and while dramatic confirmed double die varieties for 1966 are not among the most famous in the series, the production conditions of the year make their theoretical presence plausible in ways that motivate careful examination of lettering and portrait details under magnification. Off-center strikes, where a planchet entered the press collar in a shifted position and received its design impression offset from center, leaving a visible crescent of unstruck blank metal on one side, occur across all high-volume production eras and represent the kind of error that ranges from barely detectable to dramatically obvious depending on the degree of the shift, and the most visually striking examples, where the offset is significant but the date and major design elements remain readable, are the ones that generate genuine excitement in error coin collecting circles. Die clashes, impressions left on working dies when they strike each other without a coin between them, leaving ghost images of one side's design visible on the other side of subsequently produced coins, are another anomaly class documented across this production era, and a confirmed die clash example from 1966 with clear visible transferred imagery represents the kind of mechanical curiosity that specialist collectors pursue with quiet but sustained intensity. The rim of a 1966 Jefferson Nickel is one of those details that rewards examination far more than its modest appearance suggests, because the rim's consistency, sharpness, and completeness around the full circumference of the coin serves as a direct indicator of die condition, collar integrity, and striking pressure at the moment of production. A coin struck under ideal conditions will show a rim that is evenly raised, cleanly defined, and fully continuous, a rim that under magnification presents almost like a deliberate architectural feature rather than a mechanical byproduct. And when that quality is present on a 1966 nickel that has somehow survived the decades with its surfaces unscratched and its fields undimmed by contact marks, the overall visual impression is one of a coin that feels paradoxically new despite its age. Contrast that with a coin that left the press with an uneven rim, one side crisp and the other side soft or incomplete, and you have physical evidence of either a collar problem, a planchet feeding issue, or a die that was wearing unevenly. And while these imperfections reduce the coin's grade and appeal in standard collector terms, they also document the manufacturing realities of an era that is now historically distant enough to be genuinely interesting on its own terms. Strike alignment is another examination point that collectors check as a matter of standard practice. Hold the coin by its edge with Jefferson facing you, flip it on the vertical axis, and observe whether Monticello appears in the expected upright orientation or whether it has rotated to some degree. Even a modest rotation of 30 or 45 degrees from the standard relationship represents a documented error type. And significant rotations of 90 degrees or more are among the more dramatic mechanical anomalies that error coin specialists actively seek across all denominations and eras. Transitioning into a realistic discussion of what 1966 Jefferson Nickels actually trade for in the collector market requires setting an honest foundation, because the mintage for this year was genuinely enormous. The mint was producing coins at maximum capacity throughout 1966, and high surviving populations of circulated examples mean that standard worn coins carry very limited market premiums above face value in most dealer and auction contexts. A heavily circulated 1966 nickel with smooth high points, merged Monticello steps, and the kind of uniform gray patina that comes from decades of pocket and register life, is a coin that a dealer might include in a bulk lot without individual pricing, and a collector building a basic Jefferson Nickel date set might pay a modest amount above face for a clean example simply to fill the slot. But neither of these scenarios represents meaningful numismatic value in market terms. The conversation shifts when condition improves substantially uncirculated examples with original mint luster intact, no significant contact marks in the fields, and well-defined design detail can attract genuine collector interest. And professionally certified coins in the MS63 to MS65 range have appeared at auction with realized prices that reflect the relative scarcity of true uncirculated survivors from this high circulation pressure era. The full steps designation, awarded by professional grading services when all steps of Monticello's portico are cleanly and completely defined on a coin, adds a meaningful premium to any 1966 Jefferson nickel that achieves it, because the production environment of 1966 was not particularly conducive to consistently sharp step definition, making full steps examples genuinely less common than mintage numbers alone would suggest. Confirmed minting errors with dramatic, professionally authenticated anomalies exist in a separate market tier entirely, and significant examples have in documented auction circumstances attracted values ranging from hundreds to several $1,000s depending on the nature of the error, the degree to which it is visually compelling, and the appetite of the specialist bidders who compete for coins with confirmed, irreproducible production histories. Though all such values are estimates drawn from historical records and no outcome in the collector market is ever guaranteed, the 1966 Jefferson nickel will never be the flashiest coin in a collection. It makes no attempt to compete with the romance of a key-date rarity or the drama of a famous era with a decades-long auction history, but what it offers to the collector who takes it seriously is something arguably more honest and more durable, a direct material connection to a specific moment of institutional pressure and national transition, a coin that was made under unusual circumstances and carries those circumstances in its physical details for anyone patient enough to look. Before drawing any conclusions about a 1966 nickel in your possession, whether you've noticed something that looks like doubling in the lettering, an unusual alignment between obverse and reverse, a rim that seems uneven, or a color or weight that doesn't quite match your expectations, the consistent advice of experienced numismatists is to seek professional authentication from a recognized third-party grading service rather than relying on personal examination alone. Because the difference between a coin that appears anomalous and a coin that is professionally confirmed as anomalous is the difference that protects collectors from both over-evaluation and missed discovery. The collector market rewards precision, documentation, and verified authenticity in ways that enthusiasm and optimism alone cannot substitute for. And the coins that make the most compelling auction appearances are always the ones whose stories have been rigorously confirmed rather than enthusiastically assumed. If this look at the 1966 Jefferson nickel has reminded you that ordinary coins from ordinary years sometimes carry extraordinary stories beneath their surfaces, then subscribe and stay close, because the next coin in this series has a production history that is even more surprising than this one, and the details hiding in plain sight on its face are the kind that make longtime collectors stop and look again at coins they thought they already understood completely.